Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar focusing on the data quality framework for the EU medicine. As per the published agenda, Peter Arlett, co-chair of the Big Data Steering Group, will open the meeting, and it will be followed by Anna Cocchino, who will present the current draft data quality framework. And finally, Jesper Kerr, co-chair of the Big Data Steering Group, will moderate the question and answer session. Peter, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much indeed, Paolo. And indeed, my pleasure as the head of the Data Analytics and Methods Task Force here at the EMA and co-chair with Jesper of the Big Data Steering Group to open this webinar on a data quality framework for EU medicines regulation. The context of our webinar today and the context of this data quality framework is the network strategy, so the network for medicines regulation in the EU strategy to 2025, which foresees innovation being driven by a transformation to data-driven medicines regulation. The implementation of this transformation is being enacted through the Big Data Steering Group and its work plan to 2025. And in that context, then we have actions to strengthen data quality, hence this work on a data quality framework. So if we could go to the next slide, it just shows the objectives of our workshop this afternoon. So rather simple, 3 objectives. Firstly, to inform you about the public consultation on this draft data quality framework for EU medicines regulation, to provide a walk through that framework document, as well as explaining the process and the consultation that went into developing it. We will then get your feedback and answer as many of your questions as we can through the question and answer session, which is being run through Slido. Let's go to the next slide. So the consultation was launched on the 10th of October this month. It's the first draft of the data quality framework for EU medicines regulation, and the consultation will close on the 18th of November. The second bullet point on this slide shows the functional mailbox where comments should be submitted, and we would request, just to ease our analysis, we would request that you use the specific template that is linked at the beginning of that data quality framework document. We would anticipate quite a lot of interest in this document. We believe it's the first such document at this level to look at data quality in a broad way for medicines regulation, and therefore we think a lot of stakeholders will want to comment. And to help us do that analysis, please use that template. And we'll collect the comments received. We will then review the document based on the feedback, and of course there will be changes to the document before we publish it as a final first version in the first quarter next year. Let's go to the next slide. A little bit of housekeeping for our webinar this afternoon. This meeting is being broadcast live on EMA's website. It will also be recorded, and we would anticipate that the recording will be placed on the website so that colleagues that weren't able to follow it live will be able to look at it after the event. The Q&A in the second part of the meeting will be conducted through Slido. You can access Slido through the website, the slido.com website, putting that reference hashtag DQF22. You can also get to the relevant page in Slido using the QR code. And for those of you who are interested and would like to look at it, there is information on our data protection policy relating to the Slido data, and there's a link in the bottom right-hand side of this slide. So I wish you a really interesting and informative webinar on this data quality framework. I strongly encourage you to read it, think about it, and feedback. And on that note, I hand back to Paolo Alcini. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Many thanks, Peter. So now I leave the floor to Anna Cocchino to introduce us the data quality framework. Anna, please.
In terms of my part here, I'm Anna Cocchino. Good afternoon, everyone. I will now run you through the background information with regards to this data quality framework drafting, whereas a little later on we will be seeing the document itself, and we will look together how it was created and what's the mind process behind it, hopefully helping you to provide us with some feedback that we very much would like to hear from you. So, first of all, this is to put it into context. This work is part of the joint HMA-EMA BDSJ work plan 2022 to 2025. So we have a number of recommendations here that were provided to us from the HMA-EMA BDSJ work plan that we are working as a task force to follow. So we have some, for instance, on EO network process, on the network capability to analyze, and in this case, we're looking for specifically in data quality and representativeness. And the final goal of this particular recommendation is to establish a EU framework for data quality and representativeness, to develop guidelines, a strengthened process for data qualification through scientific advice, and to promote across member states the uptake of electronic health records, registries, genomics data, and to secure data availability. So this is the final vision of this piece of work. When it comes to our own data quality framework, the objectives are to improve consistency in the evaluation of the quality of the data used by regulators, to enable the development of a standardized approach for data quality across all data sources, to facilitate a more systematic use of data for regulatory decision making, and ultimately to support the trust of stakeholders in the data that underpin regulatory decisions. Looking at this very first draft, we are specifically interested in providing general considerations that can be applied to a wide range of data sources for the purpose of characterizing and assessing data quality for regulatory decision making. We're looking to provide outlines on how to measure data quality in different scenarios where real world data need to be used for regulatory decision making, but not only. Is intended to serve as an overarching framework for which more focused data quality recommendation can be derived for specific application. And we'll see a lot of that when we're looking through the document. The document has been produced in a collaborative process between EMA, HMA, and towards the European Health Data Space Joint Action, TEDAS, in consultation with a wide range of stakeholders. And more on this process that through which we consulted. We have started at the beginning of the year with a revision of existing data quality framework, so essentially a landscape analysis that went from January to April, and we have looked with the revision committee to look at every initiative that is out there and known to us to use as a starting point for further drafting the data quality framework. So things like other regulators, whatever knowledge exists out there. We have picked this up, and together with a dedicated data quality workshop with external stakeholders in April 2022, we went and produced a table of contents that we have based the drafting of this document on. We had also dedicated sessions with topic experts to further refine, get input, and familiarize with content. We also went to have dedicated session with the aforementioned TEDAS to align on principles and data maturity models that were proposed. So in terms of scope, we're looking at a data quality framework that provides a set of definitions, principles, and guidelines that can coherently be applied to a wide range of data sources to support regulatory decision making. As content, we're looking at the moment would like to focus on the general framework. So terminology, metrics, dimensions, data maturity models. This is the kind of things that we will look through today. We envisage that in the next step, we will look at things like real-world data for medicine regulation and other use case, but at the moment, we would like to pin down the concepts, the terminology, and so on. So in terms of next steps, they were briefly outlined a little earlier as well. We're looking at 6 weeks public consultation starting from last week until 18th of November, end of the day. We're looking into implementing the comments and input from the stakeholders that we will receive in this period, and then to put out there a final first version of the data quality framework addressing those specific comments. Now, data quality is assessed from the point of view of fitness for purpose for users' needs. So it's the sum of several features of data, including also representation as well as correspondence to reality. For the purpose of this document, data quality is described with the goal of supporting regulatory decision making, and we have put forward 5 particular dimensions to describe better data quality, and those are reliability, coherence, extensiveness, timeliness, and relevance. We have specifically focused on these. These are in a sort of adherence with other data frameworks out there. And this is a diagram of the whole document basically into one image. We will go through the document in detail, so there's no particular need to spend too much time on this, but it gives you an overall view of what you're going to hear next. So it looks at things like foundational determinants as the data quality dimensions and metrics, data workflows, and maturity models. In terms of comments, we would like to receive them via templates, as we usually do here at the agency. So we have via our website, there's a link where you could find a template to find the comments file, and that we would like to see in sent to us via email to a particular mailbox. If I may, I will try now to go to the website and actually show you these things, and you have to please bear with me a little bit while I'm fiddling with some buttons, but I think it will worth it. And I hope you are able now to see the actual document which I wanted to show you. And it was there in the slide saying that we should look at the template. So I could open this here, is hyperlinked inside the document, and you're looking at a Word document that you can download and use to collect comments internally. And what you could do, if you wish, is to provide us with the name of organization and the email of the person who's providing these comments to us, and also to please tick the disclaimer on if you would like to be contacted by us. So how we plan to run this is, if you provide these details to us, we will, if needed, contact you back to get further information on the comments that you have made. However, if you do not, we will not use the email that you have sent as a contact point. We will respect your privacy and will not go and replying further. So this is the first page in which you may or may not give us the agreement to contact you. We are then going to a general comments. So it's a general comments section where you are able to provide us with any general comments you might have with regards to the document. So not necessarily focused on a particular section or a particular row as much as overall on the document. It's a rather standard way of working at the agency with providing comments. So that's in the section 1. And in the next, we have some specific comments on the text. We have a place where we could put the line numbers or the relevant text. And I believe you've seen when I briefly opened a little earlier that the text is referenced at the side with numbers to pick a reference. So for instance, if you'd like to make a reference to, say, I'm scrolling through it, I don't know, row 81 with regards to maybe this diagram, row 83, you will be able to put it in this document as a row 83 and then the comment or any proposed change in, or what you might want to transmit to us. Now, looking a little bit through the document, I will try to be as efficient as I can possibly because time is sort of flying with us. In table of contents, you will see that the content is split in the usual beginning things like executive summary, glossary, and background to give a bit of context on the document. Is then going to looking at the scope of the data quality framework, things like definitions, limitations, and the structure. So to set a bit the scene of the work that we're doing. Afterwards, there's a number of notions that are being clarified in this section 5 in order to be used later on. So we clarify things like primary versus secondary use of data, publication versus data consumption, data metadata, and so on and so forth. In section 6, we're looking at data quality dimensions and metrics, so things like, say, reliability, or perhaps, so the same dimensions that I have presented a bit earlier: extensiveness, coherence, timeliness, and relevance. So these are the kind of dimensions that we look, and we look under them at things like sub-dimensions that go to define them, determinants, and the metrics. And this will become clear shortly. I will try to run you just through one or maybe two of them, as the rest, it tends to be a bit more of something that you would read on your own, but I will run you through a few to see how it's done. We then proceed to go to look at maturity models with these. So the maturity models are also split into foundational kind of maturity model on the intrinsic data and then on the ones that are question specific. And it will soon be a little clearer. Now, proceeding to go through this. So as I was saying, this is the diagram that shows everything on a page. We were telling you about big data steering group and the need for the data quality. We have a small glossary, not as big as we usually have. So I think we tried to be a little more clearer, maybe perhaps fewer abbreviation and more perhaps content. Hopefully we managed to achieve that. We then go into defining the scope of this data quality framework. So it's mainly around definitions, principles, and guidelines. It's meant to approach a wide range of data sources, and it's meant to be in line with recommendations of the TEDAS. So it's a general kind of framework. Please keep this in mind when you read it, and think of your particular use case, but bear in mind that it's not yet fully addressed to that detail. In terms of definition of data quality, the data quality is defined as fitness for purpose for users. So it comes from a user's perspective, rather, let's say, from a data provider sort of perspective. So, and that user would be the regulatory decision. So that is the angle that the document is focused on. Now, what the document does not do, these are somewhat self-explanatory to most of us, but it is worth, though, we're saying that we're trying to make a document that is has a wide audience. So therefore, we have went ahead and stated things that might some of us seem rather obvious, but that's okay. It's on purpose. So, for instance, the evidence intended is not and generated insights are not a purpose, are not a part of what this framework gives us. So it won't come up with methods. It's not the purpose of this. Although the agency has separate work streams for that, it is not intended to provide guidance with regards to evidence. Now, it also does not look into having any aspects related to data quality that are not directly impacting regulatory decisions. So, for instance, accessibility is not addressed here. Another point, of course, the underlying elements of data that the data refers to are not the purpose, but the data is, and that's kind of clear to most of us, but it's worth mentioning. So, for instance, we're not talking about the purity of a medicine, as we're talking about the data characterizing that purity. Semantic interoperability and standardization, again, are not the purpose of this document, but they are a purpose of the work that the EMA does and other agencies. So it's clearly very important, just not the purpose of a data quality framework. Structure I have touched upon, we were looking at two parts. We would like this first part, the one that we're looking at the general framework, to look at a coherent approach to data quality, so to come with the definitions and concepts and so on that would go for a broad range of data types, whereas later will be a second part, framework specialization, that will look deeper into particular use cases. So again, having this in mind, this two-step sort of approach in some ways. Now, determinants. Determinants are an important concept for our data quality framework, and we refer to them mostly as any elements that contribute to data quality and can be, say, measured or controlled and at a particular stage. So we're looking at these determinants to classify them. We split them in three categories. One, we're looking at foundational determinants, or the ones that are referring to processes and systems through which data is generated. So the foundation, how the data comes to be. This is the part on the foundational. On a second layer, we're looking at intrinsic determinants. So we're referring to things that are inherent to a specific data set. So inside the data, so looking a level up past the foundational. And then we have determinants that are question specific. So those are obviously targeted to a specific questions. So these, we're going to look through them throughout this document to these specific determinants. Now, we also defined, quickly touch upon the data lifecycle, and here are described general high-level life cycle on the steps, things like definition of data requirements, data collection, and so on and so forth, because they're relevant to describing data quality in general. We go into explaining the difference between primary versus secondary use of data from the point of data quality, in which we point out that for secondary use of data, you would have a posteriori kind of look at the data quality, whereas for the primary, you are able to establish requirements beforehand. This is an important difference to make. There's also a difference between publication and data consumption. So publication refers to data generated or collected, processed and made available. Well, on the second hand, the consumption is look at data that's procured and aggregated to support analysis. So it's a difference that sometimes is perhaps it could be overlapping, but other times it's worth putting out there. Data versus metadata is again important to us. Data is, of course, traditionally described to as data about data, and for the purpose of data quality, we want to point out that metadata should in general follow the same framework as data. So if you think about it, it is after all data, so it should follow the same lines. We describe validation versus verification. So verification is the assessment of quality within a data set, whereas validation refers to its check against some gold standard. So that difference is also useful later on. Granularity of data, value level, column level, and data table. I will move a little faster over this as it's less prominent in the document. We go on then and to define dimensions, metric, and measures, quite important elements that we build on later. A dimension is something that describes the features of reality. So if you want an example, think of the length for a physical object. A metric is a way to assess the value of a dimension. So think of length measured in meters, if you would like a visualization of it. And then it comes the measure, which represents a single data point. So this many centimeters, for instance. So with these elements in at hand, we then proceed to a section where we start defining dimensions and so on. So I will focus on the first dimension that we define, which is reliability, and it's a dimension that covers how closely the data reflect what they are designed to measure. So to what degree that data is corresponding to reality is what we're looking, how it's reliable. So how correct, how trustworthy. So this is the kind of concept we're working with. Now, underneath this concept, we can also go further and have subdimensions. So in this case, we define 3 subdimensions: precision, accuracy, and plausibility, which in turn give a different flavor of this reliability. So precision, for instance, is looking at the degree of approximation by which data represents reality. Accuracy, discrepancy between data and reality, whereas plausibility is looking and confronting a data item with the entities is meant to represent. And we have a few examples to make it a little clearer, but that's the kind of things we characterize as dimension. So this is the dimension of reliability with its subdimension. Now, further on, we do this connection back to the determinants. So we have discussed about the determinants being the ones referring to the primary, to the systems and processes as a starters. We've discussed about the determinants that are looking at intrinsic aspects, and then we discussed about some that are looking at a specific question. So what this does is to look at this dimension in the context of determinants. So for instance, reliability is heavily reliant on the systems and processes of the primary collection. When it comes to intrinsic data, reliability is hard to measure in a pure data-oriented framework, but it is possible to do so, whereas reliability is independent from the questions asked. Sure, when trying to answer a question in relation to data, threshold can be set up. However, reliability is not depending from it. And then it goes on and creates these sort of tables in which we discuss subdimensions versus metric, group, abstract metrics, framework, example. So this is the kind that of more practical sort of hands-on measurements that are then described, taking all the concepts that I have shown so far. And obviously I will not go in detail over such a table, but it is here and it's worth going through. So similarly, it will have other dimensions as such, and I will go a little faster through them as of course you would be reading it in your own time. So extensiveness, for instance, talks about completeness and coverage. So how much data do we have? There's also sub-dimensions of it, of course, the completeness and coverage, one of them referring to the total information that could be available, completeness, whereas the coverage refers to the real world, so how much information we have in regards to the real world. And extensiveness, for instance, in talking about determinants of extensiveness, and it does the same, looks into foundational versus intrinsic versus question-based, and gives some thoughts and recommendations on it. And similarly, a table like this describes the metrics and how exactly you could measure the given elements. Coherence is the way to express how different parts of the overall data sets are consistent in their representation and meaning. So is the data processable as a whole? Are the format the same across the data sets? For instance, is age always approximated in years? Talks about analyzability in essence. Talks how everything fits together. Looks, of course, at sub-dimensions, so things like a format, things like structural, things like semantics. So format, I don't know, are dates always in the same format? Is the structure always the same? And semantic are the meaning of the values the same? So keep the same value through the data to the database. Uniqueness also is interesting, of course, to all of us talking about duplication. We say here that is typically the uniqueness and the duplication is typically a problem for linked data, but to be honest, it is a problem also for primary data, thinking, for instance, safety reporting, ICSRs, and adverse drug reaction would be plagued by the same duplication sort of potential issue. We then go into determinants. Again, same sort of structure. You have by now probably got a bit used to it. It talks about how coherence is impacted by foundational, by intrinsic, and then by question-related sort of determinants, and then goes into describing further metrics and rules and so on to do so. Timeliness, so availability of data at the right time for regulatory decision making. Talks about afterwards things like currency, so how fresh data it is. The data. Determinants as well described. It gets a little less. It's obviously timeliness is much more impacted by the foundational determinants. Hence, this section that you're seeing here. Relevance talks about the extent to which a dataset presents data elements useful to an answer, so very much focused on the question asked and how the dataset would serve it. And yes, this is the section 6 that goes into describing dimensions. With the dimensions that we spoke of, what we do is further go in this next section to define maturity models. And to do so, first we describe how we set up two tables that put together on one side the dimensions we described and the determinants to see them in one place, sort of. This first table refers to data, whereas this second table refers to metadata, because we've also found this to be an important distinctions to make. And then we go in actually defining the data maturity model. So first of all, we're looking at the foundational determinants and then define levels. So for instance, level 1 we define as documented, where processes are documented, true, and verifiable. So we're talking at a minimum, the processes are documented, true, and verifiable. There is some form of metadata to it. There are some audit processes, and there's some performance monitoring. So this is describing, this is what we would call a level 1 is documented in the context of foundational determinants. It then adds up going upwards. So a level 2 formalized would have all of the above, but will have also an industry standard applied to it. In a level 3 implemented, we have the formalized bit plus a standard data quality process automatically and by design implemented. Whereas at the level 4, which is meant to be a aspirational kind of level at this stage, we find we should be machine readable to unify data of the data quality elements for the downstream consumption. It would, and metadata would comply to FAIR principles. So similarly, we define the same, looking at the time to see how much do I need to. So similarly, we define two other, we're looking at with the other two foundational, with the other determinant level. So we're looking at intrinsic, and then we define a level 0 where we don't have some hard minimum requirements for quality, but it is expected some level of data quality to be in place. We're then looking at metadata, and metadata level of this maturity model. So we expect a set of quality metrics as metadata. In a level 2, in a standardized, we see a standardized set of quality metrics that could be compared across data sets, so go further than the level before. Whereas in an automated level, all of the above would be also automated for a large extent of metrics, and this would run towards the direction, and would have also FAIR principle embedded. The last level, level 4, the feedback, would bring also the data consumers into place that can provide feedback and improve the data collection and production process. Lastly, we're looking at the question-specific aspects of data quality, and for these, we define these 3 levels, one of them being ad hoc, so a question that is dealt with at the query time on an ad hoc basis, a domain defined where it talks about a range of common questions for which is identified and metrics and thresholds can be derived, and then goes to the level of question defined where the requirements for a specific questions are precisely codified and can be mapped to metrics and could automatically assess the relevance of a data set for a specific question. So that would be like the ultimate level for a question defined maturity model. So lastly, last 3 or so paragraphs just go into saying that, of course, the data quality from the source should be dealt with, and it's the in designing data collection and generation process, data quality should be embedded at that stage. That the quality management system is something that is encouraged and wished for, and talks about briefly about standards that would be known across industries. And then the very last paragraph tells us that this is the generic framework that we looked at, and we do look to go deeper into some of those use cases and others as in the future years. So this is a setting up the scene to continue from there. And with that, I'll breathe, and I have hopefully I will thank you for the attention while going through this document. And I think I will pass the floor. I think, Paolo, if you can help me out there, what's next? I think I'm sharing back a PowerPoint.
Yes, please, Anna, share the PowerPoint, and if you can,
I will do so.
Go to the first, to the penultimate slide. And Jesper, the floor is yours.
Sorry, just need to unmute myself. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Anna. What a wonderful walkthrough of what I think is a comprehensive, yet in the different sections, very concise document. And I'm really looking forward to that. Obviously, this has been out now only for about a week, so questions and reactions for natural reasons will be limited so far. I'm very, very much looking forward to the feedback we'll get from all of those investing time into commenting on this and reading it and giving different perspectives to this. I think that is a key path to success on this document, but it starts out really well. So thank you very, very much, Anna, for the walkthrough here. And I think from the Slido, just slowly to get us started, I think we had one question coming through here I think I'd like to pick up on. And there's also a positive response here for the great overview, Anna, and especially for creating the opportunity to provide input to the DQF. And maybe a question here for you, Paolo. Is EMA intending to seek specific feedback from health technology assessment HTAs and perhaps encourage a joint use of this guideline?
Thank you, Jesper. Yes, HMA will be involved. Sorry, HTA will be involved, and the main point is we will need to get their feedback in writing during the public consultation, and especially if the interested colleagues in HTA's body will provide also their meaning in the first part of the feedback form, they will provide also their contact. We'll also be able to contact them directly if they are interested in order to open quite a detailed channel of discussion. And also we will involve them via our EMEA formal channels. And another element that could be interesting is that we will be very interested in the various use cases in order to define maturity model for specific areas and so on. So HTA feedback will be quite important as well.
Very good. Thank you, Paolo. And I think we probably also would come across stakeholders, users as well, that may not necessarily have been in the focus area for this. I know there's interest from data permit authorities to also learn from this. So I think this is an open invitation. I would like to just underline here that let us know how this also looks from your perspective, because I think we need to take more input where that is relevant, obviously. Although we think this is a very good first version of this, there are likely things that we need your input on. There will be things. Let me say that very, very clear. And I think to the point of making this also more relevant, a question to you, Anna. Are there any plans from the EMA to provide guidance on what a full data quality assessment would actually look like if you follow the data quality framework?
No, indeed, it's part of what we're yes. Yeah, the short answer would be yes, but the longer one is be that we're looking into ways to now take this as soon as we have this sort of settled and then discuss with our stakeholders to look further on how to do a sort of a step-by-step, a decision tree. This is the kind of things that we have been discussing in our working group, how to help the process to be more clear and a little to flow better, to make use of the elements that it proposed, and to actually come up with a practical way to assess them. So yes, we are looking very much into that direction and to coming with a data quality assessment flow.
Mm-hmm. Any areas where we would prioritize the work initially? Would that be around clinical trial data or real world data, or any priorities that we should share with people?
So yes, what we know at the moment that we would like to start off when looking in the real world use case. So that is a first priority set out by us from the big data steering group. With regards to which of the other ones, the prioritization is still ongoing. We're still discussing with our experts. We're still looking into which comes first, sort of.
So there's an opportunity here to be second in line to real world data, but obviously, given Darwin EU and metadata catalog and the real world evidence, an important area to establish data quality definitions and frameworks around. While talking about the definitions, the languages, I'm just having a consideration here where we'd probably like to have a little bit of a talk around that. A data quality framework provides a common language, consistency across different areas of use of data. Paolo, could I ask you to give a few words to what that could mean?
Yes, Jesper. So the idea is exactly what we are trying to achieve with this first part of the document. So this generic part is really trying to set out general language, general concept that can be afterwards applied to the various use cases. This is really the starting point. And in the subsequent version of this document, we aim to utilize the same concept in order to provide a guideline that is properly harmonized. That is really the scope of this and why we are doing that. We will have, I'm sure that we will have a lot of feedback during the public consultation, and also in particular on this point, because different use cases has different need from data quality perspective. So even some concept may need to be tailored also to the use cases, because there is there are generic aspects that we can standardize in a sense, but there may be specific need that we need to take into account. This is why we split the document in a generic part and a part more focusing on dedicated use cases.
And happy to see that actually some questions coming through from Slido here. So really appreciate that we're having this interaction with those of you out there bold enough to actually move forward with questions. There's a question here directed to you, Anna, as well. Do you know when to expect to move to the second aims for this framework for specific use cases? So anything about the timelines you can share about? I know we have the consultation until the 18th of November, but in particular the use case around real world data for medicine regulation, when will we actually be more concrete around that?
We do have some timelines set out in the work plan. So we do know that is next year. We do know that in that work plan, the Big Data Steering Group work plan, there's outlined a workshop dedicated to this somewhere towards the second half of the year. But we're thinking to how to bring that forward, but we don't have very exact timelines right now. We're just waiting to finish with this step to move to the next one. But we do know for sure that next year will be dedicated to achieve this. Yes.
Thank you. So I think that's almost like a cliffhanger, right? So people should really stick around this channel to receive more information. I'm quite confident this will be highly appreciated and useful once we start to share that. And in particular, also what with the real world data use case initially, and Paolo, what you alluded to here, the feedback we need from you out there, right? This only gets better from your input and your involvement in this. And I think that's obviously where we are asking for enriching what we are proposing here, right? So to give us the feedback that is needed in order to advance this, and with the real world data use case, obviously making it concrete for one area initially for we want to advance on. So let me just jump topic just slightly, because that could potentially be interesting with future work. We have the Big Data Steering Group, but there's a question here around supplementary data quality framework for data from digital apps, or would such a data follow the proposed framework? Paolo, do you dare to have a take on that?
So, in principle, we designed this particular framework, in particular the generic part, aiming to be applicable to any kind of data. Also, therefore, data coming from digital app or other kind of data coming from device, possibly. So, and that is one first aspect. Secondly, the idea is to define in the coming month and year specific section of the document related to use cases. And even if we didn't prioritize yet the use cases that we are going to develop, so in which order and which one will be developed, we may take into consideration also the need from digital app, but that is going to be further discussed also within the network to understand what is the meaning, which use cases will be prioritized.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Wouldn't it be safe to say that?
I don't know, Jesper, if you agree on this.
No, I definitely do. It's just in our conversation here, maybe also If there are areas around digital apps, streaming data, continuous measurements, etc., that challenges our framework concept, obviously we'd really like to have that as an input. Wouldn't that be fair to ask for that?
Sorry, Jesper, would you mind to repeat? I had a
Yeah,
connection.
so if there are people out there who can see that there are challenges around digital measurements, streaming data, continuous measurements, wouldn't it be fair that we are being informed by such challenges to a data quality framework by those reviewing it?
Of
So
course.
really asking for input, don't we? Right.
Yeah.
So
Agree.
yeah. But we would definitely like this to cover that area as well. But again, I mean, some of the experts around these topics are out there, so we are sincerely asking for your input on this in relation to data quality framework. So let me just look through the other questions we have here. We still have a good amount of time for some of these. So there's one here for making it more explicit, I think, Anna, to you. What's the scope for the data quality framework? Is it intended for any study using secondary data being presented to EMA, or is it for specific studies?
Challenging. Yeah, I think that's we should invite the person who answers the question to come to our workshop and let's discuss this. No, so where we are, we're now broad and open, and we're thinking big, and we're thinking overarching, and we're thinking we'll be able to address everything that comes to EMA. That's the sort of the vision right now. However, I'm pretty sure that once we start putting foot in front of the other, and we're getting closer to practicalities, probably it will get a little bit narrower, and I expect that we will feel the need to start treating them one at a time more specifically. So I think it's a combination of the two, and I think the next year will be very exciting in finding that out. From my point of view.
No, I think that's a good approach, Anna, right? And it also goes along with the fact of being more explicit into the different domains of types of studies, secondary use, primary data collection, prospect data collection, retrospective analysis, and the conditions around that. I think it's actually laid out nicely in the papers. So as such, it doesn't exclude those uses, but it just addresses their different circumstances around data quality in those instances, right? But the use cases that you have already alluded to will make that far more explicit, right? So very much looking forward to that. Then there's one here that I think is obviously intriguing as we move into a reality where we are starting to access data in different repositories and bringing them together in big networks in order to analyze that data. So the question here goes, when secondary use makes use of pools of databases, would the DQ assessment, would that be conducted for each separately? Or should it be complemented by an overall assessment that the set of data sources is fit for purpose? Just wondering whether, Xavier, if you're here with us, whether you have a view on that, applied individually to each data source and or applied to the pooled data?
Yes, thank you, Jesper. Well, the data quality framework provides a generic system for evaluating the quality of the data that are used for regulatory purpose, and therefore gives confidence to regulators about the quality of the data that they will use. And therefore, in principle, the data quality framework should apply to all data sources that are used for regulatory purpose. And now there are two aspects in the data quality framework. First of all, there is the quality of the source data, and I think that is reflected by the term reliability. But this is then, and this should apply actually independently of any specific study. This applies to the source data. But then there will be the use of a specific data source for a specific research questions. And indeed, this then would apply to the use of the data source to answer the question. And if the data source is used specifically in a multi-center, multi-database study, then this should apply probably overall for the study that is using several databases. So I think we should make a difference between the quality of the source data, but also the relevance, as specified, of the data source for the specific research question in the context of a multi-centered study.
Oh, thank you. And Xavier, wouldn't it also be fair to say that applying a data quality framework also should ideally improve on each individual data source's general quality for multiple purposes, multiple studies, multiple uses? So I think at the end of the day, it's probably a good investment in achieving better quality by this. So moving on with the time we have left here, maybe a few questions we can still cover. There are a few questions here around clinical trials that I think we should probably try to address, although it's only the pilot stage at the European regulatory network at the moment. But questions around data quality framework, around the clinical trials data, how it's becoming applicable to clinical trials data, when, as the one who asked the question here already said, that they have robust process and requirements in place to manage this data. And I think also in connection to that, there's an additional question, that is, once we apply a data quality framework to clinical trial data on the individual data, will this impact the requirements in the GCP inspections for clinical trials? And I'm not sure we necessarily know the questions to that yet, but I'm just, if Frank Petervie is on the call to maybe give a little bit of perspective on that. Feel free to send it back, Frank, if it's too early days for this.
Thanks, Jesper. So indeed, I remember some discussions we had with stakeholders that clinical trials is already a robust area in terms of data quality. And therefore, one would think at first that the data quality framework may not apply as much as it would for other areas. But I think we should remain open-minded and not just restrict ourselves to areas where we don't have these data processes and requirements in place, and think that there may be some gaps or some improvements possible in the area of clinical trials, be at conduct level or but also at individual patient data level, and therefore see whether we can use this data quality framework also in the area of clinical trials. And also in the future, if we sort of strengthen this data quality framework, it would also be a shame to apply it in a heterogeneous way. So if it's applied systematically in many data areas, I think we should also consider looking at it in clinical trials area, so that we have a sort of homogeneous way of looking at data quality.
Thank you, Frank. No, I think that really is one of the important pieces, homogeneity, and also common language and definitions. How you apply it, what is relevant in different types of trials, different types of studies, will be very specific. That also makes sense to the way the dimensions and the foundations have actually been defined in the paper. One question I probably would like to get towards the end here, and maybe it's a bit back to you, Paolo, but maybe also between some of us here, This is obviously an EMA, HMA, Big Data Steering Group initiative, and hereby now launched by your team for public consultation. With the recent statements from the ICMA, the ICMRA, that have called for international harmonization on the use of real-world data, how do we foresee the engagement with other regulatory agencies around this framework? Polo, any ideas around this from the consultation piece right now?
So, for example, we are involved in the discussion with ICMRA. So we are part of that particular forum and on the real world data in particular group. So the idea also will be to try to foster comments possibly from the other international regulator, global regulators, in order to get also their view. Because yes, the data quality, that framework that we envisage is called the EU Data Quality Framework, but it will be quite important to see if we can align also as much as possible also globally. So seeking their input is going to be quite important.
Mm. No, I agree, and definitely some elements here where we've already, from the workshop we had last, had other regulators in the room to help us to define some of the elements in there. I think the maturity model is one example of such an input that came from that session, and many others in there as well. So I hope we can reassure people in the global discussions around this and making sure that we obviously collaborate globally around this. I think coming to the end of this, maybe just one final question I would just like to put in here. And it's almost obvious, I think, but I think it needs to be said here, with the question being, will the data quality framework proposed by EMA be a requirement for the studies promoted by the EMA? And Polo, I mean, right, if we develop this, we intend to use it, right?
Yes, we intend to use it, and we will need to see how we can actually integrate the data quality framework and the specific use cases that we are going to develop in our current processes. For example, we have, and maybe Anna can also further contribute on this. We are also developing Darwin, for example, in the context of real-world evidence, and that could be a potential good, how can I say, allow me the word, test bench for this particular data quality framework, because we are developing it, so the data quality will be quite important, and therefore maybe we can also start including in that, or keeping the data quality framework in mind. I don't know, Anna, if you want to further elaborate.
Well, that's pretty much in the lines that you just said, Paolo. So indeed, we had envisaged even a couple of years ago when we started this, that one of the first uses of this data quality framework should be around the Darwin. So we have put it in our plan that we expect to apply this practically in the work that is done in Darwin, and that's already sort of something that we know that we plan to do. What we also would like to do, speaking of practical application of a data quality framework in the EMA work, we would like also to connect it to another initiative that we have around collecting metadata from real world data sources. So we would like to have a module there that applies the principles that were described here on good quality metadata and the FAIR principle, and to make that a proof of concept, make it work, show that it works. So there's various practical application that we have in mind for data quality framework you're saying.
Thank you. So I think that probably is where we can end the session by concluding that the proposal here for data quality framework will be something we'll apply as well, and with concrete applications into the Darwin EU. So taking our own medicines, also being transparent about our approach to this, right? And I think what was so nicely laid out here by Anna and colleagues, the first use case area being real world data, and obviously for good reason with Darwin EU, but also because there's a need in the area. So I think I would just like to conclude with a thank you to all of those presenting, and especially to you, Anna, for taking us through a very good walkthrough, an elegant walkthrough of the document. And I think for all of those asking a question. And the important note to end on here is really that consultation is still open until the 18th of November, and we'll continue consultations on the versions, on the concrete implementations and use cases along the way. So very much looking forward to hear from all of you in this process. Right. Thank you. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Jesper. And if I may just add another little detail, is that all the questions that we didn't manage to address will be in any case taken into account when we are going to review the document. So they are not lost. But the problem is that for the limited time, we were not able to address all of them. Thank you, Jesper. And colleagues. I think that we can conclude here. So many thanks, and we will welcome your comments. Bye-bye.